I'm a single mother to my 8-year-old son, Mark. When this happened, he was only 5 and I was 27. I own my own house, which was passed down to me by my grandparents. It's on the quiet side of town, surrounded mostly by older people, and Mark and I still live here today. It was Christmas time, and I was out shopping with Mark. We spent the day going through the mall, stopping at clothing stores, and even a hardware store, where I bought a gift for my dad. Once we were done, I took Mark to McDonald's for burgers and ice cream. Afterward, we left through the south exit of the mall. That's when we ran into a mall Santa standing outside. He waved at us and said all of the usual Santa stuff. Then he knelt down to Mark's level and asked him what he wanted for Christmas. Mark squeezed my hand tighter, but I allowed it. He seemed like a normal, friendly mall Santa. Mark said he wanted a Nintendo Switch, which was ironic because that's exactly what I planned to buy him. Santa laughed and said, "If you're good, maybe you'll get it." While looking up at me and winking, I smiled. He stood up and started complimenting me, saying, "Mark, your mother's a looker. You know that?" Mark laughed, even though he clearly didn't understand. I still smiled, trying to keep things light. We chatted for a few minutes about holiday chaos and Christmas stress. He mentioned he worked at the mall, and I jokingly said being a single mom during Christmas was overwhelming and that I could use Santa's help. That's when he made a joke that immediately made me uncomfortable. He said, "Mark, have you ever heard the song, 'I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus'?" Mark shook his head. Then the man leaned toward me, turning his cheek as if asking for a kiss. I assumed he meant an innocent peck on the fake beard, but as I leaned in, he suddenly turned his head and tried to kiss me on the lips. I pulled away just in time. The way he did it felt aggressive and deliberate. His expression changed, and there was nothing jolly about it anymore. I immediately grabbed Mark's hand and said, "Come on." As we walked away, he shouted, "Merry Christmas." That was the last thing I heard him say as we exited the mall. As we drove past the back entrance, I noticed he was no longer standing outside the mall doors. I wish I had thought more about that at the time. When we got home, I brought the bags inside, locked the door, and put on a Christmas movie for Mark. We were settling in when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was too late for door-to-door visitors. I told Mark to keep watching the movie while I went to the door. "Who is it?" I asked. A man's voice replied, "It's Santa." My heart dropped. I told him that if he was the mall Santa, he needed to leave immediately or I'd call the police. He responded calmly, saying I had dropped something out of my bag and he was just trying to return it. When I asked what it was, he said he didn't want to be nosy, but if I opened the door, he could hand it to me. I told him to leave again. Instead of opening the door, I called the mall's management office to report him. That's when they told me something that made my blood run cold. The mall did not officially hire any Santas. Whoever was dressing as Santa was doing it on their own. I felt incredibly unsafe. I went back to sit with Mark, but my mind wouldn't settle. After a few minutes, I went into the kitchen, raised the blinds slightly, and looked out the window. I couldn't see anything. The kitchen light was on, and it was pitch black outside. Then I heard it. Ho, ho, ho. It sounded like it was coming from outside my house. I immediately called the police and told them I believed I was being followed by a man dressed as Santa. Officers arrived and took a report. Having them there made me feel slightly safer. A few nights later, around the same time, the doorbell rang again. Mark was already asleep. I turned off the TV, went upstairs, and stayed in my room for the rest of the night. The next morning, as I was leaving the house, I found a note taped to my front door. It was typed. The note said, "I'll be blunt. I'm sure you can guess who this is. I didn't mean to scare you the other night. After pretending to be Santa for 6 hours, hormones go a little crazy, especially when a pretty lady talks to you. You and your son are the cutest things ever, and I'd love to be a part of your family someday. I already know where you live. I just need your number. You can't pretend you didn't feel the connection. Happy holidays." Ted. I wanted to rip it apart, but instead I took a photo and called the police again. Since the note included his phone number, they said they could work with it. The following Monday, I received a call from a detective who told me the man would not be contacting me again. If he did, I was to report it immediately. I never heard from him again. To this day, it remains one of the most disturbing Christmas experiences of my life. The living room was completely dark. There were no lights on, except for one faint beam coming from a flashlight. I could only see the person's legs as they were bent over behind the Christmas tree. A black bag sat on the floor beside him. Then the man stepped out from behind the tree and looked directly at me. He raised his index finger to his mouth and made a shushing motion with his lips. In a low whisper, he said, "Yes, I'm Santa." I was old enough and smart enough to know that this wasn't what the Santa I grew up with looked like. I immediately started screaming for my mom and dad as loud as I could. The man panicked. I remember him frantically looking between me and the black bag, filled with our Christmas gifts, clearly trying to decide what to do. In the end, he abandoned the bag and ran straight for the front door. I don't remember whether the door was locked or already unlocked. I just remember him being gone. Seconds later, my parents came rushing down the stairs. I was hysterical, screaming that there had been a man in the house. When they saw the black bag on the floor, stuffed with gifts and ornaments, it proved everything I was saying was true. This is where my memory starts to get fuzzy. So later in life, I asked my parents what happened next. My dad told me he ran outside in his slippers, ready to chase the man down. Half the ornaments had been ripped off the tree and stuffed into the bag. Even now, I can't understand what kind of sick person steals people's sentimental Christmas ornaments. According to my dad, the man had broken in through the back door, prying it open with a crowbar. The wood was chipped and damaged. A few blocks away, another house had been broken into the same way, and it made the news. It was almost certainly the same guy. I don't remember much from when I was 6 years old, but this memory has stayed with me as clearly as if it happened yesterday. It was December 2020 when my fiancé and I bought a house together. It's a cute place in a decent neighborhood, exactly the kind of area you'd want to raise a family. That's why what happened 2 years ago was so shocking. We knew all of our neighbors, both next-door neighbors and the 3 closest houses across the street. Everyone was friendly enough. Still, you never really know what someone is hiding. Our neighbor to the right, Paul, always seemed polite, but quiet. We'd see him almost every day, coming or going, presumably to work, though we never knew what he did. Then one day, we stopped seeing him altogether. His car hadn't moved in days, on its own. That wasn't alarming. all the neighbours had their Christmas lights up by then, including Paul. I even thought it was kind of nice, him being a single man in his 40s and still decorating. One night, while I was putting up my own Christmas lights, I noticed Paul's lights suddenly started flickering wildly. Not just one strand, all of them. It didn't look intentional, more like some strange electrical glitch. The next day, when I left for work around 10 a.m., Paul's car was still in the driveway. When I got home, it hadn't moved. All his blinds were closed, but his Christmas lights were on, so I knew he was home. I joked with my fiancé that he must be hibernating. Later that night, my fiancé mentioned that Paul's lights were flickering again. I went outside and saw the same erratic glitching as before. It didn't look programmed at all. I decided to be neighbourly and check on him. I knocked, no answer. I rang the doorbell, still nothing. All the blinds were closed. I rang one more time. Finally, the door opened. Paul stood there. I told him about his flickering lights. Ironically, they had stopped by then. He said he hadn't noticed and thanked me. I asked if he was okay, since we hadn't seen him in a while. He said he was just feeling under the weather. Something felt off. Then I heard it. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it sounded like a child screaming for help. Paul didn't have any kids. I was about to ask if he heard it too, but something stopped me. I said goodbye and walked straight back to my house. The moment I got inside, I told my fiancé to call the police. "I think Paul has a child in his house," I said. She stared at me and asked what I meant. "I think he kidnapped a child." I called the police myself and reported that I believed I had heard a child screaming inside my neighbour's house, a neighbour with no kids who hadn't left his home in over a week. I asked to remain anonymous, even though I knew Paul would probably guess it was me. The police arrived and entered the house. What they found was horrifying. A young boy was locked in the basement. He had been there for 4 days. He'd been kidnapped from a completely different town. As for the flickering Christmas lights, the boy was incredibly smart. Somehow, from the basement, he found a way to make the lights flicker as a signal for help. Any time he saw movement outside through the blocked basement windows, he tried to get someone's attention. When I knocked on the door, that was his chance. Thanks to him, he was reunited with his family. I don't want to know what he went through. I just hope he's able to live a normal life and leave this behind him. One thing I do know is that Paul won't be getting out of prison anytime soon. Soon after, I was home alone one weekend, so my girlfriend, Jenny, came over to spend it with me. It was the middle of December, and Christmas festivities were in full swing. Jenny wanted to watch Christmas movies that night, so we ordered food, drank wine, and sat by the Christmas tree in the living room. We started with the Polar Express, then moved on to Elf. At some point, we ran out of wine. I decided to run down the block to the liquor store to get more. It would only take about 10 minutes, and since it was a Saturday night, they were open late. The usual cashier was working, and like always, I got stuck in a conversation with him. Mid-conversation, I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. It was Jenny. I interrupted the cashier and picked up. Jenny sounded scared. She told me she kept hearing noises coming from beneath the living room floor, which meant the crawl space. I told her it was probably nothing and that there was no way anyone could be down there. She asked me to stay on the phone with her until I got back So I did. The walk home took about 5 minutes. When I arrived, Jenny was still sitting on the couch with the movie paused. She said she was listening for sounds. I asked if she'd heard anything else, and she said no, but asked what if there was an animal down there. I told her that wasn't possible. There were no openings to the crawl space from outside. I opened the new bottle of wine, and we continued watching the movie. Not long after, we both heard it. A distinct thud coming from beneath us, from the crawl space. I looked at Jenny. She looked at me. She was right. There was something down there. I said maybe there really was an animal, and we paused the movie again. I went to the closet where the crawl space entrance was, grabbed a flashlight, and climbed down. I stayed near the opening and did a quick scan. There were tons of boxes down there, so a small animal could have been hiding anywhere. It also smelled strongly like urine, which pretty much confirmed that something had been living down there. I wasn't an exterminator, so there wasn't much I could do. I messaged my family group chat and told my dad he'd need to call pest control the next day. As I was climbing back up, I heard movement from across the crawl space. I don't know what it was, just that something moved. Thinking an animal might run at me, I rushed up the ladder and slammed the door shut. There was nothing else we could do, so we went back to the living room and finished the movie. After Elf ended, we went to my room and eventually fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night with a pounding headache and the need to use the bathroom. I opened my bedroom door and looked down the dark hallway. At the end of it, I saw a human silhouette. I almost screamed. Instead, I quietly shut the door and locked it. Then I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. The doorknob turned. Someone tried to open the door. A deep, hoarse voice on the other side said, "Hello." That's when Jenny started screaming. She had woken up when I got out of bed and heard the voice too. I couldn't calm her down. I was terrified myself. After a moment, I heard footsteps walking away from the door. I immediately called 911. Waiting for the police felt endless. When they finally arrived and searched the house, no one else was there. But the smell in the crawl space wasn't my imagination. There was a literal puddle of urine on the ground. That meant someone had been down there for a while. The police believed it was likely a homeless squatter, but that didn't make it any less horrifying. My family didn't even believe the story at first. I've never forgotten to lock my doors since that night.